The Horseshoe Bend of the River Severn, one of the most splendid sights in the West Country. This is the final flourish of the longest river in Britain, and in these last few miles of its course, it slices the county of Gloucestershire in two, with what have now become powerful tidal waters. And right in the middle of the Horseshoe Bend, on the western side, is the little town of Newnham. For centuries there was a great deal of traffic on this stretch of the Severn, and Newnham played an important part in all the trading that went on. Then in 1827 the Sharpness to Gloucester Canal opened over on the other side, thus providing a quicker and safer route for shipping to reach Gloucester from the sea. And so the port, which had been so busy until then, went into a commercial decline, from which it never recovered. This is the quay where the boats used to tie up to take on their cargoes, not just of locally made cloth and cider, but more importantly, timber, oak bark and coal, brought here from the Forest of Dean, which lies up in the hills behind the town. Some of the old warehouses have now been converted into very desirable residences, but there's another, more curious architectural feature that one can't help noticing in many of the walls down near the river. Patches like these of large, dark-coloured blocks in amongst the more conventional brick and stone. Here are some good examples. Now, what are they? Well, fairly obviously they've come from a very hot place, at one time were molten. This was glass slag, waste left over from a glass factory that was located somewhere down here near the quay. Now, historically, this was an important glass house. Established in the reign of Charles I, it was thought to be the very first in the country to use coal as opposed to wood to heat the furnace. And, of course, it was the mines in the Forest of Dean that provided the coal. Sadly, apart from one or two bottles discovered near where the factory once stood, there are no identifiable examples of Newnham glass. Still, there's one amusing piece of old glass on permanent view in the Victoria Hotel at the top of the town. It's a small panel of painted glass, and it depicts the fable of the ants and the grasshopper. The story is told of how the grasshopper, who'd whiled away the summer idly singing, asked the ants for some food when winter came. They indignantly refused, pointing out that they'd worked hard all summer to provide for themselves in the winter. The English is rather quaint, and it's dated 1622. To my mind, Newnham, with its kind of double main street, is one of the most attractive towns in the area. It's historic too. It was one of the 5 ancient boroughs of Gloucestershire, and for centuries the county's most important town on this side of the river. Someone who knows the river as well as anyone in these parts, and goes beachcombing in the Severn mud every day, is Lionel Lusty.
I'm sorry to laugh, but that stuff on your 7 League boots looks a bit sticky.
Mud to a blanket.
Let's go and find somewhere comfortable, shall we?
Yes.
Right. Must weigh a bit, actually, all that mud on your boots.
Nearly as heavy as a bucket.
Now, that's not a harvest from the sea. That's not fish that you've brought up.
No, it's better than fish to me. That's Severn coal.
Oh, gracious. And you've picked that up on the beach?
Yes. Pick it up most on the ebb tide, most tides. Don't get a lot like this all the time. Sometimes it's half a bucket, sometimes it's 2 buckets.
And some of it's obviously been worn by the erosion of water.
Well, they do say that years ago when Bulla Dock was working down and the forest coal was being exported, hundreds of tons went into the river, shot over the barges as they were filling up. Well, I should say that's the rounded off coal. Yeah. But this coal, the wife's uncle, who was the last ferryman, with a friend up Rodley, they seem to think that there's a coal seam under the riverbed. And when it ruts out sharp edges like that, that's fresh coal.
And how much do you pick up?
Well, enough to keep 2 fires going all the winter.
Come on, how much is that in terms of a ton?
Oh, over a ton, I should say. Over a ton. With logs of wood as well, which I saw.
It's a heck of a saving, isn't it? Now, what else do you find there?
Oh, there's lots of little things. There's these fossils. These, the children.
Ah. Now, you tell me, I think I know the name of these. Devil's toenail?
Devil's toenail. Devil's toenail. Yeah. There's hundreds of those that's picked up.
So, devil's toenails, fossilized shellfish, and coal from the river. But the short time I've been here, it's fairly obvious that the tide comes in and out at the rate of knots. Is it possible ever to walk across the Severn?
Oh, yes, yes. Further up, away from the quicksands, you can walk across at low tide, dead low water. Not, you know, so why you keep away from the quicksands and you can walk across.
Have you done it?
Oh, yes, often. Yes, many times. I've even walked across and picked up a stranded salmon and brought it back.
That was worth doing.
Well worth doing. Well worth doing.
Perched on the brow of the hill just behind Newnham is Little Dean Hall, an old mansion with even older remains in the grounds. They're Roman, and Donald Mazer Wright, who lives in the hall, has just started unearthing what he believes could be a vast site covering about 10 acres. Though the excavation is being carried out under professional guidance, it's being run as a private dig, and what we see here today is the result of just a few months' hard work. Donald, how important would you say this site is archaeologically?
Well, Professor Jones at Manchester University has identified the site as a Springhead Temple, certainly regional significance and possible national significance. It's a very complex site, and the temples evolved through various periods, and it could have parallels with the great Gallic shrines on the continent, which nothing yet has been recognised in this country.
So we've got nothing like it at all here?
Apparently not.
But why should there be a temple here, out in the countryside on this promontory?
Well, Derek, the word promontory is probably the key thing. The view from the top of the hill is standing across the Severn Horseshoe at Newnham, and the Romans obviously enjoyed such panoramas. The situation here between Gloucester, which was a colonia, retired military men and serving military men, which is 12 miles away, and Caerleon to the west, legionary headquarters, and Caerwent, the Romanised town of the Silures. Also the commercial importance of the Forest of Dean as a mineral field, where there was a road coming down past this site to Newnham, all adds up together to suggest that there was a lot of very important, influential, wealthy men in the immediate district who decided to use this site and turn it into a temple complex. The fact that it is growing up around a spring is probably the critical factor in determining what sort of temple it was. It appears to have started as a pool with a spring head. It was then Romanised and turned into a simple little water shrine, which at a later period still was enclosed by a massive basilican hall, which is, or appears anyway, to be the largest basilica of its type recognised in Britain so far, and that obviously indicates that a large number of people are using it. And in the broader context of the site, we have the Springhead Temple here. Also to the north and to the west, we have other building remains that could equally well be temples as well. We're looking at a temple complex of very large size, comparable to the Gallic shrines on the continent.
Excavations in the cellar of Little Dean Hall have revealed ancient walls, also thought to be Roman. And the house that now stands on top of them is the result of a building that has evolved since Saxon times. You might expect a house such as this to have a ghost or two. You'll be perfectly right. There are apparently several. In fact, I would say it's the most haunted house I've ever come across. During the Civil War, 2 royalist officers died by the sword in the dining room, and phantom bloodstains were said to appear on the floorboards. Then the spectre of a black boy has been seen walking along a landing with a lighted candle in his hands. 2 brothers who were killed in a duel over their love of the same woman have made their presence felt, and a monk in a black habit has been seen walking through the house. Then, across this drive at night, there walks the ghost of a member of the family that lived here during the Civil War. There can't be many other houses in the country with such an eerie catalogue. And so to the forest itself. Once it filled almost the whole area between the Severn and the Wye. Today it's smaller, but it's still a wonderful place to explore. The Forest of Dean was once a royal hunting preserve, but it was to become one of the nation's most precious assets. In the Middle Ages, it was the major iron mining centre in Britain, and until the last century, it provided timber to build the ships of the Navy, the ships of Raleigh, Drake and Nelson. It was so important that it's believed the Spanish Armada had special instructions to try and destroy the forest, even if they didn't manage to conquer the country. Of course, they failed on both counts. Probably the worst disaster ever to befall the forest was in the 17th century, when, in effect, it was sold to Sir John Winter. And he must have made a huge profit out of the timber, because hardly a tree was left standing. Fortunately, after local complaints, Parliament stepped in and started a massive replanting programme. There have been other close calls too, but now the forest is safe. In 1924, control passed to the Forestry Commission, and in due course it was designated a National Forest Park, the first of its kind in England. The Commission now looks after about 28,000 acres, and as Chief Forester David Langford explains, that means a lot of felling and planting.
Our planting programme has settled out at about 200 acres per year, and if you talk about 1,000 trees per acre, that is the magnitude, a couple of 100,000 trees per year we are planting. Plus, of course, the replacement of some that you lost from last year's planting, because you never get 100% success.
And felling?
Felling, well, of course, we are, in order to plant 200 acres of ground, you've got to fell 200 acres of ground. But of course, you're felling a much smaller number of trees than you originally planted, because during the intervening 50, 60, 70 years in between planting and the clear fell, you have thinned and reduced the number of trees progressively.
Well, here you are felling in this particular block now. What will this timber be used for? It's larch, isn't it?
This is European larch. It's about 50 years old, which in economic terms is mature. And the trees that you see here, the butt ends are going into the sawn fencing market, and the top of the tree will go into a local factory which produces a product made up of chipper and various glues.
How do you see the main part of the Commission's work these days?
It remains as it always has been, and that is for the production of timber. There are subsidiary objectives, and the most important of these today are amenity, wildlife conservation and public recreational use of the forest.
Well, let's take amenity and public usage. What do you have to do to keep the public happy?
They're two very separate things. Amenity, the way I see it, is the look of the forest, the sensible use of the contours of the ground. A classic example of something that you don't do is run a straight line of trees up a hillside. They're the amenities and the use of, as far as possible, of species which are attractive.
And then you provide picnic sites and so on.
Yes, this is public recreation. The demands on the Forestry Commission's estate, and in particular forests like this one, where we're surrounded by a large population, are immense.
They haven't just provided picnic sites. There are camping facilities, signposted forest trails, scenic drives and special viewing points, and they're all well used. This site has been reclaimed from an old coal tip, and with its play area for children and its permanent barbecues, it's making this a memorable day out for a lot of people. And if you don't like choking in a cloud of smoke, you can go fishing. Cannock ponds may look natural, but they were man-made. They've been here since the early 19th century and were created as a source of water power for an iron forge and hammer mills at Park End, further down the Cannock Valley. They drove a huge water wheel, which is thought to have been the largest in Europe at the time. A small monument marks the very centre of the forest, and just on the other side of the road there's an imposing and rather handsome 17th century building. Today it's a hotel, but as one might guess from its name, the Speech House, it once had a very different function. This is the hotel's restaurant, with what looks like a minstrel's gallery. But in fact, this is a courtroom. And for centuries, the men who sat up there in judgment were the verderers of the Forest of Dean. It's thought that the office of verderer was created by King Canute in the 11th century. The main duty was to punish those who offended against vert or vensen. Vert referred to the plant life, vensen to the animals, in particular to the deer. Conviction could lead to fines or imprisonment, although at one time a man found guilty of killing one of the king's deer could have been sentenced to mutilation or even execution. Today, most of the verderer's powers have been transferred to the Forestry Commission or the ordinary judiciary. But the verderers still meet regularly in this room to discuss forest affairs. St. Breville's was once the administrative centre of the forest, and the ancient area of land called the St. Breville's Hundred coincided near enough with the boundaries of the forest. The castle was one of a chain built by the Norman kings to keep the Welsh in Wales, and it was here that the constable also held his court of mine law. It still performs a useful function today as a youth hostel. Since the 13th century, the miners of the Forest of Dean have had unique privileges. In particular, they've had the right to mine on their own account virtually anywhere in the forest. They're known as free miners, and although no iron has been mined since the last war, there are still those that dig for coal. And their hard way of life hasn't stopped them giving light-hearted and imaginative names to some of their mines. For instance, Strip and At It, Go On and Prosper, Uncertainty, Speculation, and there was even one seam called No Coal. This is one of the half-dozen or so free mines being worked at present. Donald Johns and Gilbert Keir have been earning their living from it for 6 years, and the coalface is now about 250 yards in from the entrance. On a good day, they can take out as much as 5 tons, and they sell it to the CEGB, although others do sell to passers-by as well. They have regular visits from schools and often get caught up in conversation with folk like me exploring the forest. Donald is chairman of the Free Miners Association, and he always enjoys talking about his way of life.
Careful. Hard and dirty work, Donald.
It is hard and dirty work there, I guess.
Have a rest for a minute. Are there free miners anywhere else in the country?
No, not as free miners as such, not like we are. There's parts of the country that they've got something similar, but not free mining rights, not like we've got.
Well, how do you become a free miner?
Well, to be a free miner, you've got to have been born within the 100 of St. Brevos. You've got to have worked a year and a day in a mine and reached the age of 21. You've still got to be a male to be a free miner. Women still can't do it, even with your women's lib.
I shouldn't qualify on any account, should I?
Well, no.
How do you go about finding a mine, a place to dig for coal, though?
Well, you experience mostly. You go into an office that's set up for the job in Colford called the Deputy Gaveler's Office, and you look at the old plans. There's plans of every seam of coal in the forest there, and we're at liberty to go in there and look at these plans and decide that we want to start a mine here, which we did, and then you just take potluck.
You could be unlucky.
And you can be very unlucky. We've been unlucky in the past. We've had some bad ones, we've had some good ones.
This one was all right.
It's proved all right up to now. We're making a living.
Then what happens when this one is worked out?
Move on, start again. Hopefully have another good one, might have another bad one.
The remains of Roman and pre-Roman open-cast iron workings can be seen dramatically in what's called Puzzle Wood. Its name is very apt, because even though paths, bridges and steps have been laid out for the visitors, it's really amazingly easy to get lost in it. And there's another intriguing reminder of the forest's industrial past that could easily be missed unless you were looking for it. In the Cannock Valley, you can find the remains of some of the earliest railways or tramroads in the world. Originally laid out in the early 19th century, only the stone sleepers seem to survive. Here they are, solid and substantial, with the holes showing where the rails were attached. The wheels on the horse-drawn wagons weren't flanged as they are today. So to keep them literally on the rails themselves were cast in the shape of the letter L, like that. This was just one of the tracks that helped form a comprehensive network used for transporting iron and coal in particular to various factories and forges in the forest, or down to the river for shipping off elsewhere. The age of the steam train has been marvellously preserved here at the Norchard Steam Centre near Lydney. Over the last few years, the Dean Forest Railway Society has been building up a collection of locomotives and rolling stock, and this now covers quite a large area. Its popularity as a tourist attraction is well established, and has easily justified the faith of those dedicated volunteers who originally created the centre and now run it for the enjoyment of all. There's always some restoration work in hand. Here they're giving new life to a locomotive that once looked a bit like this. They've been working on it for 3 years so far, all in their spare time.
Do you want this beam out then? Yes, please. He's all right down there.
For many people, the enthusiast who remembers the days when all trains were steam trains, or the younger generation who've never seen anything quite like it before, the highlight is a ride up the line. Now, it may not be the Flying Scotsman, but my goodness, it can be fun. Well, the Dean Forest Railway brings us very fittingly to the end of the line. The end of our day out in this beautiful part of Gloucestershire. An area where so many relics and traditions of the past are kept lovingly alive.